So now that we've talked a lot about communicating with families and how important it is, how do you guys feel after that video? I just want someone to listen to them.
They said they needed it too.
I mean, watching that video, it may sound a little overly dramatic, but I mean, it broke my heart when she was like, "We feel abandoned." I mean, would you ever want any family to feel that way? No, I mean, I think you guys should feel you're in an empowered role when it comes to communicating with families. Even if it's just 3 minutes at the beginning of the day to tell you how the morning went, or at the end of the day, you know, that communication with families is so important because you can hear what they have to say, and like Jen said, they might just need someone to listen to. Has anyone ever had an experience like this with a family? Yeah?
Yeah, but now that they're getting help and they went to the parent sessions, like,
Oh, positive solutions?
yeah, they just, and I've given them like the solution kit and stuff like that, and they're just super appreciative that our school just kind of, because they've had parents come up to them and say things, and parents have said things to me about them, which is completely inappropriate, but I think it's starting to like work, and they just love that everyone at our school is just really like supporting them, so I think that helps with them too, because it gets them on board, like, oh, we can do this, so.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that experience with us. Yeah, I know. I mean, I watch these videos and it makes me feel a little bit sad for the family, but I think that, you know, with these guys especially, they came a long way when it came to this work and stuff like that. So this is a happy scenario. This is a happy story. So one of the biggest things, and I think this is a time when families can be so incredibly helpful, is when it comes to goal settings. Because like we've talked about a lot in the past, is having some continuity across many environments is really impactful when it comes to children. If rules are being enforced in the classroom and they can be applied to home, but they're not being applied, that can be a big hole for some kids. You know, that can be really confusing for them. I can act this way at home, but I can't at school. So setting goals with families is really, really important, making sure that everyone's goals match each other. You know, setting up a team meeting, like I said, to discuss and identify those goals. Sometimes your goals as a teacher or childcare provider might be different than the family's goals. Like we've talked about a lot today, we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Looking towards determining a target routine where that challenging behavior might be occurring. And then taking small steps, beginning with targeting one challenging behavior to either reduce or one target desirable behavior to improve. If a child's doing something really well, if they're sharing really well, you know, let's continue with that behavior. So like I said, starting small is really important. So that being said, this is a concept that's really important when it comes to goal setting. And this was actually a concept that I was unfamiliar with until I started working with Pyramid. And what it is operational definition. Has anyone heard of that term before? Yes, no, maybe? Maybe a little bit? So what it is, by definition, it is a description of a behavior that is presented in terms that are fully observable and measurable. A good operational definition would mean that all team members would be able to agree at any moment in time whether or not that behavior is occurring. So like I said, this was unfamiliar to me, and Catherine was a really big help. She helped to explain this to me a lot, so if you want to jump in at any time, feel free. So the conversation that we had about it was, and I really liked her example, an operational definition would be defining a specific behavior, and the way that you define it as such that if someone completely unrelated, someone who has no knowledge in early childhood, if an alien came down and had no background knowledge, they could see whether or not the behavior was occurring. So does everyone get what I mean when I say that? So we have some examples down here. We have a non-example and an example. So the non-example would be wanting control, or the child is manipulating the situation. Whereas an example of an operational definition might be walking away from the adult when the child is asked or told to do something. The example that I really like is using tantrums. So an operational definition of a tantrum would be very specific. Little Johnny is laying on the floor, screaming very loudly, smacking his hands up against the floor. A non-example would be Johnny is really upset because he can't control the situation. Do you see the difference between the two? That's my perception, that I think Johnny's really upset because he can't control the situation. Whereas the operational definition says that he is currently laying on the floor, he is making a lot of noise, and he's smacking his hands on the floor. So then if a robot came in, they could see, I wish I could do a robot voice, but I can't. They could see that he is doing those three things currently at this present moment. Does everyone understand the meaning of an operational definition? Kevin, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I was just going to say the whole point to writing an operational definition is that if you had a sub in your class on a day that you were sick, and you and your co-teacher have been doing this really great job of tracking behavior, and you have the definition of what you're tracking written in an operational way at the top of your little sheet that you're using to track, nobody has time to talk to your sub, before she comes and so on. But she can just read this description, and by virtue of the way the description of the behavior is written, she can absolutely say whether or not she observed that behavior or not in little Johnny. She doesn't have to have any background knowledge of Johnny, any information ahead of time about anything written in his behavioral support plan to know whether or how many times that day he laid on the ground, screamed loudly, and threw his hands up and down. Anybody, it doesn't matter who they are, whether they're a robot or an alien or a substitute teacher, could come in the class and just be a fly on the wall and confirm and say, yes, that happened this many times today, or it never did happen. But if your definition of the challenging behavior says something like, when Johnny gets really angry, he throws extreme temper tantrums, well, that could mean something super different to a substitute teacher than it does to you and your co-teacher when you talked about what that meant, extreme temper tantrum. That's a real, that can be very vague. But kicking and screaming loudly and throwing hands up and down on the floor is pretty specific that anybody could say whether or not it was happening. Does that make sense? I mean, I just reiterated what you already said. You already explained it, but I thought I had that other aha moment, like think about when you're writing these things, if you're going to go and do this stuff, if you have a substitute teacher, somebody new in your classroom helping with track data, are they going to know what you're tracking specifically and be able to observe it or not observe it and say whether or not it's happening?
No, thank you, Dr. for saying that. I think that's a great piece to bring into the equation if there's someone who's unfamiliar with the child, but you're asking them to, like she said, track data. It's super important that you're using this term. So does everyone understand why operational definitions would be important to goals and setting goals? For a family or for a parent that doesn't have any background in early childhood other than they have a child, an operational definition is going to make it very easy for them at home to track when their child is laying on the floor, screaming loudly, and smacking their hands on the floor. So that being said, we're going to do, and this is our last activity, we're going to do a quick activity in regards to goal settings. And this is a little bit of a review activity because we did some goal settings. Does everyone remember when we did it in session 11? Yes, it was session 11. We wrote down a goal for our vignette child. Now that we've talked about operational definitions and we've talked about partnering with families, what I'd like to go ahead and do is we're going to revisit that goal. And a lot of you, I do believe it is in your vignette folder. But if it's not in your vignette folder, that's okay. We'll just go ahead and you and the rest of your group can write a new goal. But when you revisit your goal or write a new one, I want you to be thinking about this operational definition. In your goal, is it specific? Is it so much so that an alien from outer space could understand when the child is exhibiting that behavior? So our goal here, do you have a question? Or are you just stretching? So our goal here is to either revisit your goal and tweak it a little bit. Maybe you did a really great job and you don't have to tweak it at all, but I want you to have these things in mind when we talk about our goals. And then what we'll do is we'll go around and share our goals later. Does anyone have any questions before we get started with that? Actually, one more thing I want to add. I'm going to go ahead and hand out a goal setting sheet from Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, PTRYC, that you can use if you would like. It does help you to organize your thoughts a little bit better, and if you find it useful, go ahead and use it, but if you find it a little bit confusing, that's okay. Then you don't have to use it. So does anybody have any? Oh, go ahead.
And it's more a sheet that prompts you to think about writing an operational definition for both the behaviors that you want to see increased, you know, the skills that you're wanting to teach the child and see more of, and then writing an operational definition for the challenging behavior that you want to see decreased, so that, again, to more purposefully be tracking progress as you're implementing a plan, whether or not you're seeing more of what you want and less of what you don't want, and having it super clear for like all people that might be observing that child. That's what that sheet helps you do. Remember, there's not a place in the sheet for writing the goal.
Yeah.
So, but still, so you can use it for if you want a little place to write.
But if you find it confusing, that's okay. It's just like Catherine said, it's looking at, you know, possibly behavior to increase or possibly behavior to decrease. And within that behavior, what might be your operational goal around that behavior, whether you're increasing it or decreasing it. So what you could do, if you already have a goal and it is operationally defined and it looks really great, maybe you could try this on top of that and you could think about some other behaviors. But does anybody have any questions? No?